Hi, I'm David Putman, and I'm with Planting the Gospel and a facilitator of the Multipliers Pathway. And today I have the opportunity to be here with a very important guest to talk about um, hero making. And so let me do a quick introduction. Ralph Moore is with me today. Ralph, it's good to see you as always. Ralph is the founder of Hope Chapel, uh, which has become a huge family of churches, a great example of multiplication for us with over 2,500 churches, 9 generation deep. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing, Ralph, from you. Just a passion for mission, all around great guy. Hey, only best by his wife, Ruby. So, hey, man, it's good to have you here. Now, for the,
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, Ralph. It's always a real treat to get to learn from you. So that's what we're looking forward to doing today. Let me set this up, and then what we're going to do today, just so you know, I'm going to set it up. Ralph's going to do a presentation, and then we're going to have a dialogue. So, it's all going to be important, but don't miss the last part of it because that's going to be the most fun when we drive it home. But when it comes to setting it up, first of all, let me just point you to the source material. And the source material is Hero Maker and the legacy of a hero maker. And if you will just take a moment and scan this QR code, then there's a free resource that you can download and benefit from. Now, if you're watching this, you're probably are interested in or part of or just exploring what it looks like to become a level 4 church and maybe one day a level 5 family of churches. You're part of our multiplication pathway. And our master tool for the multiplication pathway is something that we're excited about called the Gospel Saturation Vision Scope. So, in other words, we build the entire process around this tool. So, let me just unpack part of it today, because so you can see exactly where the hero maker conversation comes in. If you notice, first of all, the outward ring around the scope, we have the word values. And so we begin with this idea of multiplication values. You see, if we're going to be a reproducing church, then we've got to have values that are going to produce the kind of behavior that we're ultimately trying to get after. If you and then if you move, so we'll spend our 6 month process. We'll spend time every month going back and sort of revisiting these values and how they get framed in a multiplication context. The next part of our vision scope is where the crosshairs, and we simply have the letter V there for vision. But please hear me, this is not just simply any kind of vision. This is gospel saturation vision. You see, God is very clear that we are to multiply and fill the earth with his fullness. That is God's vision for all of us. And so in this really set the heartbeat and the multiplication of a level 4, level 5 church. And it is that every person within your community and beyond would have access to the gospel, or someone who knows the gospel that can share it with them. And so gospel saturation vision scope has this really crosshair focus on what gospel saturation is. If you keep rolling with this, you'll see sort of the inside of it. I'm not going to go over all of this today, but this sort of brings us to the area that we have been focusing on over the past couple of months. And it's the area identity. And if you notice, there's a pathway there. And we call this as this noted here, three micro pathways. And these three pathways, they line up with what we call in some of the multiplication materials, three dimensions of multiplication. And if you remember what the three dimensions of multiplication are, disciple making, mobilization, and capacity building. So what we're suggesting is that we need, these also can be represented in the form of three very distinct pathways. The pathway of a disciple maker, the pathway of a missionary that begins here, living in common, ends here, living sent as an everyday missionary, and then capacity building would correspond with this idea of the leader. Now, if you look at what we're trying to do here, is we're looking at it from two perspectives. The first perspective is micro, and for us, micro is the experience of everyday disciples as they grow and mature. Is secondly, so therefore we have this micro pathway, this collective experience that helps grow everyday disciples into generational disciple makers. What I was talking about a moment ago, mobilizes everyday missionaries. And because we're producing leaders and reproducing leaders, we are catalyzing new communities of faith. We're growing our capacity for new communities of faith. So that's the micro area. It's what the disciple does, what the missionary does, what the leader does. But the macro level is what the church does. And the church primarily is about this creating this culture. So the culture is created by church leaders to shape what? The micro experience of everyday disciples. Now look at the leader's pathway with me real quick. Okay, and this is sequential from start to finish. And so it begins with him serving others. We become servants, leading others, but it doesn't end there, apprenticing others. And now we're beginning to get somewhere, releasing others or sending others. And then finally, those who are sent, those who are released, reproduce new gospel communities, new churches, new expressions of faith, whatever you might want to refer to them here. But here's the key. The key is this, if we're going to increase our capacity, if we're going to increase our leader capacity, this leader pathway, then something has got to happen. And that's this, Ralph, massive shift from me being hero, me being, the pastor, me being the church planner, to how do we shift to hero maker? And that's why Ralph is here, obviously, going to over 2,500 churches. It's been a part of what he has been a part of. And so I'm going to toss out a question. And then Ralph, if you would just sort of walk us through those shifts. But here we go. Why is hero making an important priority in the capacity building dimension of multiplication? So why is the hero making so important to this dimension of capacity?
I actually think it's probably the most important. It really starts with defining who is the hero. And you were talking about vision. I think one of the problems that we have is many people come at the church with sort of a business plan. And the vision really isn't my vision. It's the Lord's vision for his church. It's what you just talked about. As soon as I begin to see that, then he's the ultimate hero. My job is to make heroes of others as they go out into the fields that are white unto harvest. And so this whole vision deal, getting everything kind of tacked down in the way it should be, really starts with self-identity. When we started out, I remember sitting in an auditorium that was designed for 66 people. My wife and I tearfully praying that one day that room would be full of people. That was kind of, I had been a youth pastor that never got over 30 kids in the youth group. Um, so it kind of almost by default, I ended up having to make heroes out of others. And then I got pretty good at it. And so I really enjoy the reference material here. The book, Heromaker, has been a really great tool for me as I come into it. Down through the years, I've always been a hero maker. So I'm just going to run through the practices that are in the book, and then I'm going to add one that I think got overlooked as we talk about the book. So the first practice is just multiplication thinking, and the basic concept in the book is that we need more leaders. Now, if you're pastoring your church and when you think we need more leaders, all you're thinking about is volunteers, that's about 10% of the deal. The real deal is that we would take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so where are we going to get more leaders? Well, pray. Scripture, Jesus said, as a kind of a starting mindset, that we should, as the Lord of the harvest, that we should ask the Lord of the harvest to send forth laborers, into his fields that are white and ready to be reaped. And so for me, it's of course, there's been that element of we need some help over here. And so we start praying for that help. And sometimes we would just leave something undone until somebody stepped forward, but we'd pray a lot. And then I would notice that, we haven't started a church in a while, or the small groups in our church, we call them mini church. We're not expanding there. I just go to prayer, and I would find that the Lord would answer that prayer by showing me individual people, showing me something in them, which leads to the second practice, which in the book they call permission giving. And the basic concept is they use letters from the alphabet, I, C, and U, to describe something. I see something in you. I see in you this. And so it's this thing of starting with prayer and then identifying potential in others. You see something that often they didn't see for themselves. We were talking about spiritual gifts in our staff, and staff members said to me, well, you have a gift of encouragement. And that was kind of like, what are you talking about? Well, you always see something in other people that they don't see in themselves, and you help them to get there. Well, that really is more than permission giving. It's kind of lifting people up and elevating people. Certainly, we make progress by helping people to envision their own future, to see that there could be more going on than they thought there would be. And then when we get into multiplying disciples, it's kind of the ICNU thing amplified, and it's that you could do more than you're doing in growing in the Lord, or you could do more than you're doing in serving in this place. You could bring others into the thing and begin to multiply disciples. We would see this. We had 7 services when I left the big church that I was pastoring, and we had a different worship team in every service. And each team had 11 to 13 people in it. And, I talked to guys that are going, I can't even get one worship team together. How do you do this? Well, there was always, you should be looking for your friends that you could bring into the team. And quite often we were training them on site. In other words, play the guitar so well, but we think you could get better. So come play with us, but we're not going to plug you in until you're better. Or somebody is still learning our songs, that they can sing great, but they're learning our songs. So they'd be up there with a microphone that wasn't turned on, and they knew it. It wasn't like we were conning them, but this whole idea that we're just building a culture where we're showing other people you could be more than you are, and we're pressing people idea of it's not just you growing, it's you multiplying yourself in the life of some other people. And, to us, it was not, we're not doing classes about this. We're just working through a relationship. When we were recruiting, like in children's church or in our mini churches, whatever, we didn't have some leadership recruitment deal going on. We didn't have 4 bases that you had to run through in terms of 4 classes that you went to. Everything was, get your friend on your team and begin to build that thing that way. The part of the gift activation part of this, and again, I see something in you, is really letting somebody know, I believe in you. And, I look back in my own life, and as a kid growing up, I was always the runt in the class, the last kid picked for sports and whatever. And I met a teacher in high school, and he was profane. He used a lot of bad language. He was an English teacher, and we sat alphabetically. I went to an all male, all technology high school, and I really didn't like to study English. And for some reason, this guy named Eugene Barrett decided that I was his kiss, and I'll let you fill it out. The word begins with an A, but I was that kiss up student. And he would sit me in the front of the class out of alphabetical order, and I don't know why. And just, anytime a student would come back to visit, and that happened a lot because people really loved this man, he would introduce them to me. 30 kids in the classroom, and this guy believed in me, and I couldn't ever, and I still don't know really why, but I'm telling you, I wouldn't be the person I am today in terms of self-confidence. I wouldn't be writing books if it hadn't been for Eugene Barrett. So I've kind of always tried to take that a little bit further. And as I'm looking at people, now what I'm trying to go with them is, let's look at opportunities that are in front of you. And let's see what the Spirit is saying to us about where he might be leading you and directing you. And so now I'm going to sort of commission people. And when I say commission, sometimes it's laying hands on people. Certainly it's not going through some denominational ordination thing. It's just that I'm with you. I'm behind you. And we're going to go from there. And then this is the part that I've added to Dave's book, where I call it culture generation. In other words, I want to generate in the congregation a culture of making disciples who are making disciples. And so as a pastor, and I'm no longer a pastor, I would try to start every sermon with a story of somebody doing something great in the community, basically bragging on them. And then I would go, and that relates to the scripture here in this way. And so I was starting every Bible teaching with a hero maker parable. And one of the things that I found was that people want attention. The pastor's bragging on Ernie over here. What can I do? And it just inspired the kind of behaviors that we wanted. I would call this practice number 6 if I was writing the book, but I sort of slid it in here as I called it number 4A, because I don't think it belongs at the very end, because the very end is where what in the book they're calling a finishing mindset, that you're helping these people realize that they don't exist for our church, and they don't exist for me as a leader. They exist for the kingdom of God, and being able to release them. In the book, they call this a finishing mindset, and they talk about Acts chapter 20, where Paul releases people. And really, in Acts 20, he's kind of talking to them about the problems they're going to face. In my mind, kingdom thinking is always going to 2 passages of scripture, actually 3, and I'm going to go through them real quick. Of course, Matthew 28. And one of the things that I like for people to notice is verse 17, where it says that Jesus assembled everybody, and some still doubted. After the resurrection, after eating food with them, they still doubted. And I like to think about, hey, the Lord can use anybody. One of the things that we're doing in releasing our disciples is pressing people always, you need to be praying for another country, because he said, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. Ask the Lord to show you the ends of the earth for you, and however the size of it is, whatever ministry that you have. And then the other scripture is in Ephesians 4, where it says that these 5 leader bases exist to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. I want to really lean into that. Your job isn't to do the ministry. Your job is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so if I've released people into that, I think we're going to do a pretty good job of taking the gospel to places that it wouldn't otherwise go.
Yeah. Hey, I love it, Ralph. Just a couple things, just debrief. One is I really appreciate 4A. And I was sitting there thinking as you were teaching this is that it's one thing for me to be a hero maker, but it's a totally different thing for me to be a hero maker who are who's multiplying hero makers. You know, not the job of the senior pastor to be the hero maker. It's the job of the senior pastor to set the pace for hero making and to be the permission giver, you know. So that was one part of it. And yeah, and I was also thinking so much about and this is like the level three magnet, you know, this is sort of what keeps pulling us back and but anyway, you know, we have this celebrity culture where we have to, if we're pastor, we have to almost fight to be the hero maker because everybody wants to make us the hero, you know.
When you think of that, I think in terms of always the level five template in my mind. You know, I was pastoring in a denomination that really valued everything's got to be big, and they made heroes out of that. And then I met Todd Wilson, Dave Ferguson, and met their book. You know, the how to become a level five multiplying church. I think about that all the time and I think of everything. And so, you know, I think of a person who's feeling bad about themselves. They're no hero. Things aren't going really well. I think we get to a point where, you know, church is doing okay. We're feeling good about ourselves. And then, of course, the level three church, where the people make a hero out of you, but quite often it's easy to make a hero out of ourselves. And this thing is all about me. And I've pastored churches of a couple thousand people. So I have a taste for that.
Uh-huh.
And there is a temptation. There's a magnet to stick there. But then the point where you begin to reproduce, you're never going to reproduce churches if you're not making heroes. But you're never going to multiply churches if you're not making heroes who make heroes out of others. And
Yeah.
I have a story that I like to get into, if we could, of a friend of mine named Ryan Delameter, and you know, just how I met him and how we kind of worked our way through the process.
Yeah. I'd love to hear about your friend. So yeah.
You know, when I met Ryan, he was just coming off staff. He'd been part of a youth pastor of one of the largest churches in Southern California, and he had gone through a divorce. A little backstory, and the guy's kind of a nut. You know, he said my head scrambled. It was a bad thing that happened to him, and so he decided he's going to go for a bike ride to clear his head. Now, most people that would mean 8 or 10 miles. Ryan rode from Southern California to British Columbia, and then all the way to Newfoundland, and then back to California. Decided his head still wasn't clear, and rode his bike to Colombia, South America. And he's a surfer, so along the way, he's seen all these little villages where people are dying, children are dying from brackish water that they're drinking. So he comes back and he gets this idea, and he pitches it to the church when he goes to work for this large church, that we could take desalination plants and put them in these villages, and then we could plant churches at the same time. And the church didn't go for it, so eventually he busted out. And when I met him, he was just getting started with something he called ocean water churches. And ocean water church, the concept was what I just told you. We'll plant churches from where we're at in Southern California. We'll plant a church, but then we're going to reach the globe. In fact, their current project is in Indonesia. They've done it in Latin America, doing Indonesia. And so when I met him, I'm always thinking we need more leaders, and you know, how do we engage people? Well, I actually met him at an exponential event, and he had just left the church, and he kind of left it in sorrow because they didn't him in any way. I mean, down to he asked for his laptop, and they didn't give him the laptop. Well, he's kind of under the gun, and some people are mad at him, and And I meet him and I'm going, I like guys that are mavericks, and this guy is one. And so right away, I just start, in with him about tell me your story. And so now here's the ICNU thing. It's like, I want to hear what you're doing and then I want to amplify this thing. I want to, kind of press him for, well, what are you doing locally to get other people to do what it is that you're doing? And is that working for you? And how can I help you? And actually for a little while, because I'm retired, um, I made that my church. And this is like almost 50 miles from my house. And so I wasn't going there every week, but I was going there. And so they actually started kind of the mother church meets in a little coffee shop. And there'll be, on a big night, there'll be 60 people there. But I started pressing Ryan about, are you raising disciples who can do this? Because what they're doing in the coffee shop is pretty simple. They get together and they sing, and somebody gets up and teaches the word, and they eat tacos. And for them, it was a Taco Tuesday deal. And so this thing has begun to grow as Ryan began to develop others to do basically what I used to see Chuck Smith do on a Sunday night. Chuck would just kind of walk people through the Bible. No, when I look at the scriptures, I'm thinking the New Testament, especially the epistles, they were letters. Nobody was doing declension of Greek words and stuff. It was just reading letters and harvesting it. And so Ryan began to multiply people doing this. And the last time that there was any count of it, and it's about 5 years in,
Right.
30 some churches across Southern California. And these guys are going into wealthy communities. One guy in particular, Malibu. And, if you got a couple $1 million and you try to plant a church behind the gates in Malibu, it's just not going to happen. It's not enough money. You don't have the clout. But if you go start a church in a coffee shop across the street from the gates of Malibu, pretty soon you got some people, and you raise up people who could lead the thing and hand it off. And there's actually 3 churches now, but they're in mansions in Malibu, California. So these are the kinds of things that can happen if we start to make disciples and help them to activate their gifts and then teach them to do what they're doing. And guess what? Right now, I'm on this thing with you, and I'm making a hero out of my friend Ryan. Whenever he gets a chance, he's making heroes out of the guys that he's raised up. And some pretty phenomenal things are happening in places where nobody right now is capable. You go into the community where Ryan started,
Yep.
you're not buy a single family dwelling for less than $2 million. So how are we going to start churches there? Well, we're going to start them for free in coffee shops. They're doing a thing called Grapple Chapel in a martial arts studio. They've just been asked by the Marine Corps, would you come and do this on base? And they were asked by the Navy SEALs, would you come and do Grapple Chapel on our base? They're just doing micro churches all over, multiplying people who can do what they can do. And they do it by the hero-making process.
Hey, I love that. I love the fact that, hey, it's simple. So it's simple enough to reproduce. And man, it can just happen over and over again. Going back to, here's these letters, I see in you. Like, this is some of the most important letters, words, statements. This is the gospel. Jesus said, I see in you. And it is so powerful. Today, Ralph, I was doing a disciple making huddle in one of our little micro groups with a couple of guys that I've really been investing in. And so Joe has a micro church meeting in his house. And I said, Joe, remind me of how long you've been a Christian. And so he'd been a Christian a long time, since 2018. 6 years, that's a long time. And but the beautiful thing about this story is I can remember 3 years ago sitting down with Joe and saying to Joe, hey, Joe, I see in you to potential to be a leader in this movement that God is starting. And I'll never forget what Joe told me. Joe said, David, I've been waiting all my life to hear this. We go burly CrossFit guy. He's got tears coming down his face. We're sitting in the Waffle House. So this is fancy stuff here, you know. And you know what? And then, so I'm gone over the weekend, or I might have went to the micro church, but I was gone and I said, hey, tell me today about what happened. And they're telling me about how these people are far from God, are engaged in discussions, moving towards Jesus. And, you know, I'm just like thinking, man, they are ready. They are ready. But again, it gets back to I see in you. There are countless people like Joe out there. Jake was one of them. He was sitting there with us. And I think about Jesus, and something I've said for a long time is when Jesus sees the least, just read the Gospels. When Jesus sees the least, the lost, and the lonely, he sees people beaming with potential. And I mean, the world's just full of it. The world is just full of just masterpieces. And man, this whole thing of hero maker is so key. Hey, one time, so we've got a lot of people who are coming through our pathway, our multiplication pathway. They want to make a difference, but you know, they've been discipled in the level 3 church. So we got, but what advice would you give to a pastor, a leader, anyone who needs to sort of make this transition? How do you become, what do you do? How do you get started?
Yesterday, I had a conversation that I think fits this really well. My neighbor, his name is Jim. He's African American. He's a pretty important person in San Diego. He oversees civilian support for the U.S. Navy in the whole port of San Diego. And about 3 years ago, he took on the role of pastor of an existing, in a very difficult neighborhood. They had drug dealers, you know, doing stuff on the steps of the church, all that kind of stuff. And so we had a talk. My wife is in the hospital right now, and I'd asked him to pray for me. I saw him coming home from work, and under it, as a bivocational pastor, the church is growing. They're reaching immigrant communities besides their own community. Good things are happening, but the man is just, they own a beautiful campground, but he told me once a month he goes up there and mows the grass because nobody will do that. And he started describing different ministries in the church. And it's like, oh, so exactly your question. I got to talk to him. And first was begin to talk. He told me about a lady from Colombia who wanted to start a ministry in the church. And I go, Jim, you need to be up there bragging about her this weekend, telling everybody that they could do what she can do. So you begin to think of being a hero maker, but then you need to call people into a kind of an accountability. And so I have this very simple thing that we've done. And I go, I would begin to go back. He was getting ready to start a class for our disciple making class for new people. And it was going to add one more thing to his workload. And I'm going, you don't need to do that. Just whatever needs to happen inside the church, that's what you need to be teaching on over the pulpit. And I'm not a topical teacher, but I want to take people through whole passages, even if I'm trying to address a topic. But then pull them together in small groups. You can do it. They do a meal, common meal after church. Get them divide them in the same groups every week so they're with the same people, and ask these 3 questions. What did the Spirit say to you while the pastor was talking today? So you're going, did you hear God? This begins to get something going on. Second question is, what will you do because of what the Spirit said to you? So now there's a measure of accountability. If somebody says they're going to do something and next week they're going to see their friends, they probably will at least give it a try. So we're starting to dabble into gift activation.
Yeah.
That. And then the third question that we always have asked in our situation is, how can we help you? Or how can we pray for you? But the helping thing is important because, again, you're activating gifts. You're getting people into the act. And you got one guy who feels responsible for it, others who are helping him. The disciple making is beginning to happen right there. But I think it really comes from the pulpit. And I also think, and that I pressed my friend Jim with this yesterday, who are you discipling? If you don't have a group of people, 2 or 3 people that you're close to, how can you expect anybody else to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it that you're, again, I go back to this, a couple of things. Observation one is hero making to you is intricately linked to disciple making, which is, which is what it's all about, And then the other thing is I keep hearing you, just keeping things simple, reproducible. Like maybe I can't create, build a sermon with, all of the theological complexities that can sometimes come with the one, and the skill that's involved in being able to communicate. But I can ask 3 questions or whatever those questions are. I can do that, and I can reproduce that. Hey, let me try something real quick.
Before you do that, can I just interject one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I have friends right now who they're doing microchurch. I mean, I'm of the belief that we're missing millions of people because there are people who think differently. They have hobbies. There are different things that glue people together. We think of race, but most of our big churches are middle class. Some Asian, some Black, some white, but they're middle class. We're not reaching the real rich. We're not reaching the poor. We're not reaching the people who are, the skaters or the surfers or the golfers or, people who are together on Sundays, whatever. So I think the micro thing is something we really have to expand on. But one of the ways that people are doing this now is there's no teaching. It's, we're going to read Galatians 3 and you're to read it 5 times this week. We're going to come back together. And then they ask those same 3 questions, but without the sermon. We're going to eat together. We're going to hang out together. And then, what did the Spirit say to you through that? What are you going to do about it? And how can we help you? And that's a church.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Love it. Love it. What I was going to say is just, really a testimony. And Ralph, when I came to Christ, I grew up in the Southeast in the Bible Belt, and you sort of came forward and gave your life to Jesus. And I was about 19 years old. I was, it was the 70s. I think you're a little bit older than me, but I was right behind you, So it was sort of that generation of, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And so I came out of that environment, and the night I gave my life to Christ, there was a pastor, his name was Travis, and he sort of put me on display. It was pretty uncomfortable, but I thought it was just what happened when you did this stuff. And he says, "This is David, and, he's committed his life to Christ, and I want him to stand up here because God has something special for him to do." And like he immediately at my conversion gave me the "I see in you." And I couldn't escape it. I couldn't get over it, you know. And so I'm just reminded in this conversation that probably everyone who's doing anything has had a moment like that. Not just like that, but a moment. It might have been a mom. It might have been a dad. It might have been a coach. It might have been a professor, like your professor or teacher, but that we've all experienced that "I see in you." And here's the deal. The deal is the minute we begin to become hero makers, what happens? Capacity increases. And that's really what this conversation is all about. How do we increase our capacity to reproduce disciples in churches as we become the hero maker and we make other hero makers, disciples who make disciples who make disciples. And so, man, we so appreciate you leading the way for us. We have so much respect for you. And man, what else? One last thing, if you have one last thing to say to us, and we'll wrap this up as it comes to Hero Maker, what would you say?
Look for people doing something and bless it. And just easy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not complicated, is it? Thank you, man. God bless you.